son looked me dead in the eyes, slid a piece of paper across my kitchen table, and said, "Dad, we need you to co-sign. It's just a formality." The number at the top of that paper was $340,000. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. I remember the way the afternoon light came through the window over the sink, the same window I'd replaced myself back in 1987. I remember thinking, this kitchen has seen a lot of hard conversations, but nothing like this. I smiled. I told my son I'd think about it. 3 days later, I was on a plane to Tucson. I should back up. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 34 years building a plumbing supply business in Central Ohio, the kind of business where you know every vendor by first name and every mistake comes out of your own pocket. My wife Sandra passed in 2019 after a short fight with pancreatic cancer. That loss broke something in me that I don't think ever fully healed. But I kept going, the way men of my generation tend to do. Quietly, stubbornly, without asking for help. My son? I'll call him my son because that's what he is, whatever happened between us. He was 34 when all this started. Good-looking kid, always was. Smart enough to get through college on partial scholarship, smart enough to talk his way into a sales manager job at a medical device company. He married his wife 6 years ago in a ceremony I paid for without being asked. I wrote that check gladly. I stood at the altar and watched him cry when she walked down the aisle, and I thought, this is what it's all for. Her name was Renata. I want to be careful how I talk about Renata because she is the mother of my 2 grandchildren, and I love those kids with every cell in my body. But I also have to be honest, because if this story means anything, it has to be honest. Renata came from money, or rather, she came from people who acted like they came from money, which is a different thing entirely. Her mother drove a leased Mercedes she couldn't afford. Her father talked endlessly about investments and never seemed to actually work. They were the kind of family that treated financial struggle as a personal failing rather than a circumstance. And somewhere along the way, Renata absorbed that entirely. The first year of their marriage, my son called me to say they were having trouble making rent. They were living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, which I thought was reasonable for a young couple starting out. I sent them $4,000 without blinking. 6 months later, they needed help with a car payment. Then there was a medical bill. Legitimate, I thought at the time. Then there was a vacation they'd already booked to Cabo that they didn't have the cash for. I want to be clear, I never said no. Not once. Every time my son called, I wired the money. I told myself this was what fathers did. Sandra would have done the same thing. I told myself I was helping them get stable. What I was actually doing was building a floor under them that they never had to learn to walk without. By the time my grandson turned 3 and my granddaughter was born, I had given my son and Renata somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000 over 4 years. Not loans. I never once called them loans, which was my mistake. They were gifts, the kind of gifts that teach people that money appears when you need it, as long as you call the right number. The $340,000 was different. My son came to me on a Tuesday evening, which I remember because I'd just gotten back from my Tuesday poker game with the guys from the old shop. I came in through the garage, still had my jacket on, and there he was, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of my bourbon in his hand. Renata was not with him. That was the first thing I noticed. He said he needed to talk to me about something serious. I sat down. I asked if the kids were okay. He said yes, the kids were fine. Then he started talking. Over the past 2 years, my son and his father-in-law had been investing in a real estate venture, a series of short-term rental properties in Nashville and Knoxville, leveraged heavily against loans they'd taken out with a private lending group out of Atlanta. I'd heard vague references to this opportunity over the years. I'd never been asked to join in, which, looking back, was probably because they knew I'd asked too many questions. The venture had gone sideways. Badly. Occupancy rates never materialized. 2 of the properties had maintenance issues that burned through the operating reserves. The Atlanta lender was now calling the loan, all of it, and there was a personal guarantee attached that had my son's name on it. $340,000. He needed me to co-sign on a new loan to consolidate and pay off the Atlantic Group. Without it, he said, they were looking at a lawsuit, potential judgment, possible foreclosure on their house. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I asked him where Renata's father was in all of this. My son looked down at his glass. He said his father-in-law had already burned through his share. Said the man had some health issues and couldn't take on more debt. Said the whole thing had basically fallen on my son's shoulders. I asked my son if he had talked to a bankruptcy attorney. He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not quite anger, not quite desperation, something in between. He said, "Dad, I can't file bankruptcy. I'd lose my sales license. I'd lose everything I've built." I told him I understood. I told him I needed to think. He nodded. He thanked me. He rinsed out his glass and put it in the dish rack the way Sandra had always asked people to do, and that small gesture made my chest hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. He called the next evening, then the evening after that. On the third call, Renata was on the phone too. She said she was scared. She said the kids were scared, which I doubted, because the kids were 4 and 1 and didn't know what a promissory note was. She said she'd lain awake every night for 3 weeks. She said this wasn't just about them. This was about the family, about what Sandra would have wanted for her grandchildren. There it was. I had been waiting for it, and I had hoped it wouldn't come. But there it was. Renata said my name, just my name, soft and careful. And then she said, "You know she would have wanted the kids to be okay." I don't remember exactly what I said after that. Something non-committal. Something to get off the phone. But I remember what I felt. I felt the particular cold clarity that comes when someone uses a wound they didn't earn to get something they want. Sandra was mine. My grief was mine. She had no right to reach into that and use it as leverage. I sat in my living room for a long time after that call. The television was off. The house was quiet, the way it gets quiet when you've lived alone in it for a few years, and the silence has settled into the walls. I looked at the wedding photo on the shelf. Sandra and me in 1981, both of us so young it was almost embarrassing. And I talked to her for a while. I said, "What do I do?" I already knew what I was going to do, but I needed to say it out loud to her first. I called my accountant the next morning. I called my attorney in the afternoon. I spent 3 days moving quietly. I am not a vindictive man. I want to be clear about that. What I did next was not about punishment. It was about finally, at 67 years old, understanding the difference between love and accommodation. I set up a dedicated education trust for both of my grandchildren, fully funded, administered by my attorney, completely protected from any claim my son or Renata could make. The older one's college was covered. The younger one's was covered. Whatever happened to their parents, those kids would have a floor to stand on that nobody could pull out from under them. Then I called a friend of mine in Tucson, a man I'd known since our Army days, a good man who'd been asking me to come visit for 3 years. I told him I was coming. He said he'd air out the guest room. I did not call my son back. I did not call Renata. The night before I left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. There were 2 drawings on the refrigerator. My grandson had made them on his last visit, crayon on printer paper. One of them a house with a lopsided chimney, and one of them what I was told was a dinosaur, but looked more like a cloud with legs. I took them both down carefully. I folded them and put them in the front pocket of my travel bag. I left a box on the front porch. Inside the box, the key to my house, a short letter, and a business card for a bankruptcy attorney in Columbus. A good one, someone I trusted. I wrote in the letter, "I love you. I cannot save you from this, but I have made sure the kids will be okay. Please use the number on this card." I did not write anything else. I was somewhere over Kentucky when my phone started going. I turned on Do Not Disturb and watched the clouds. My friend picked me up at Tucson International, and we drove out to his place in the foothills, with the windows down and the radio playing old country music, and the desert spreading out in every direction like it had all the time in the world. We didn't talk about much. He knew enough not to ask. That first night, I slept 9 hours straight, which I hadn't done since Sandra was alive. Over the next several weeks, I heard things secondhand. My son tried to reach me through my sister, who called me in a state of considerable agitation. I told her I was fine, that I was not in danger, that I was not missing. I told her I needed some time. She did not understand this, but she respected it, because she is my sister and she has known me for 67 years. I heard that Renata had called the non-emergency police line to do a welfare check on my house. The officer found an empty, clean, locked house, and a man who'd clearly left voluntarily. No report filed. I heard that my son had, eventually, called the bankruptcy attorney. I heard this through my attorney, who was acting as my point of contact. The process was started. It was not the end of the world. It was the thing that should have happened 6 months earlier, before anyone thought to call me. I stayed in Tucson for 6 weeks. When I came back to Ohio, I did not call first. I came home, unpacked, and put the crayon drawings back on the refrigerator. A few days later, I called my son. It was a short conversation, at first. He was angry. There was still anger there, and I understood it, even if I didn't think it was entirely deserved. He said I had abandoned them. I let him say it. I didn't argue. Then I said, I set up the trust for the kids. They're taken care of. I want you to know that. There was a long silence. Then he said, I didn't know that. I said, I know you didn't. I didn't want it used as a bargaining chip. Another silence. Then something shifted in his voice. Something loosened. He asked if I would be willing to meet, just the two of us, without Renata. I said yes. We met at a diner outside of Westerville, a place we used to go when he was in high school. He ordered the patty melt, same thing he'd been ordering since he was 15. I had coffee and eggs. We sat in a booth by the window, and for the first stretch of it we talked about nothing much, the weather, the drive, how his sister was doing. Then he looked at me and said, She told me to tell you that Mom would have been ashamed of you. I set down my coffee cup. I said, She was wrong about a lot of things. She was wrong about that. He nodded slowly. I could see he'd already known it, somewhere underneath. Sometimes people need to hear the thing they know said out loud by someone they trust. We didn't fix everything that day. You don't fix years of bad patterns over a patty melt in a diner off Route 3. But we started. That was 14 months ago. My son and Renata completed the bankruptcy process. They lost the Nashville properties which were the Atlanta lenders to take. They kept their house because the homestead exemption protected it. My son kept his license. He is still in medical device sales. Different company now, smaller territory, but he's working. Renata and I are not close. I suspect we never will be. There is a particular kind of person who cannot forgive someone for not giving them what they wanted, and I have made peace with the fact that I may be in that category for her for the rest of my life. I can live with that. What I cannot live without, what I will not let anyone take from me, is my time with my grandchildren. My grandson turns 5 next month. He has decided that I am the world's foremost authority on 2 subjects, fishing and dinosaurs. Neither of these assessments is fully accurate, but I am not going to argue with him. We go to the reservoir most Saturday mornings when his parents let me take him. He catches mostly nothing, but he is enormously pleased with himself regardless, and I find this quality in him deeply admirable. My granddaughter is 2 now. She has recently discovered that she can say my name, and she says it constantly, with a delight so outsized for the task that it makes me laugh every single time without fail. They will go to college. They will have that no matter what. I get asked sometimes, by my sister, by my friends from the old shop, by people in that way people have of asking, without really asking, whether I regret it, whether I should have just written the check, whether it would have been easier. I think about Sandra. I think about what she actually would have wanted. Not the version of her that Renata invented and tried to use against me, but the real woman I was married to for 38 years. The woman who stretched a family budget through 2 recessions and never once asked her parents for help. The woman who told her son, when he was 12 and wanted me to just do his homework for him, that she didn't raise quitters, but she also didn't raise men who needed someone else to carry their weight. She would have set up the trust. She would have gotten on the plane. She might have written a longer letter, and it probably would have been better than mine. But the heart of it would have been the same. There's a version of love that says yes to everything, that writes every check, that absorbs every consequence. I practiced that version for most of my son's adult life. I thought I was being a good father. I was being a comfortable one, which is not the same thing. The morning I left for Tucson, standing in my kitchen with those crayon drawings in my hand, I was more afraid than I'd been in years. Not of my son's anger, not of Renata's contempt, not of what the family would say. I was afraid of being alone in a way that choosing to walk away always makes you feel. But I got on the plane anyway. And when my grandson wraps both arms around my leg at the reservoir and looks up at me with fish smell on his hands and absolute confidence in his eyes, I know, in the place where I keep the things I know for certain, that I made the right call. Some floors are worth building. You just have to make sure you're building them under the right people. I keep coming back to one image, my son at 17, sitting at this same kitchen table, struggling through a geometry problem. He wanted me to just give him the answer. Sandra walked in, looked over his shoulder, and said, without a hint of cruelty, "I'll sit with you while you figure it out, but I'm not going to figure it out for you." He was frustrated that night, but he passed the test. I forgot that lesson for about 20 years, and the forgetting cost us both something we're still paying back in installments. Here's what I believe now, after everything, the way we treat people, consistently, over time, in the small moments nobody writes about, is what actually shapes who they become. Not the big speeches, not the dramatic gestures. The daily pattern of what we allow, what we fund, what we quietly absorb so someone else doesn't have to feel discomfort. I absorbed too much for too long, and I called it love. It wasn't love. It was fear dressed up as generosity. My son is a fundamentally decent person. I believe that. But decency is not the same as judgment, and judgment is a muscle. It has to be used or it atrophies. Every time I wrote a check, I was letting that muscle rest. By the time he sat across from me with a $340,000 problem, it had been resting for years. What I did when I got on that plane was not disappearing. It was, for the first time in a long time, making him use the muscle. There was no more floor to stand on except the one he had to build himself. That is uncomfortable. That is supposed to be uncomfortable. The discomfort is not the punishment. The discomfort is the point. Renata invoking Sandra's name the way she did. I've thought about that more than I want to admit. And here's what I've landed on. Sandra would have seen through it instantly. Sandra had a quality I always admired and never fully matched, which was the ability to love someone fiercely and still hold them to account. She didn't treat the people she loved like fragile things that needed to be protected from consequences. She treated them like capable people who could handle the truth. That was her version of respect. I wish I had learned it sooner. What I know now, 14 months on, is this. The trust I set up for my grandchildren was not a consolation prize. It was the clearest expression of what I actually believe about love. That it looks forward, that it invests in the people who can't yet advocate for themselves, that it draws a hard line between helping someone grow and helping someone avoid growing. My grandson at the reservoir, utterly confident that I know everything about dinosaurs, has no idea any of this happened. He just knows that Saturday mornings his grandfather shows up. That I will always show up for him. Some things take 67 years to understand. I'm not proud of the timeline, but I'm grateful I got there.